den rechten.
Bir müşteri olan
Den rechten Teil an der Nordseite.
Moving forward.
Mon sujet, quand même, c'est les plans de...
I'm here to talk about intercommunal speed regulation plans. Anyway, I'm not going to waste any time because I was told to keep it short. So I'm going to talk about speed at the end, maybe. Okay. Next slide, please. Before the slide shows up, there's a sentence that I do like now when we talk about our objectives for sustainable mobility, to put it shortly. I think that this is my line. I'm not young anymore. My priority is the city. Someone said that the city, I want to have a peaceful city. Everything goes too fast. A peaceful city, then quiet. Both quiet, but also with smooth traffic. I love when everything is smooth. Don't mistake smoothness and speed, and a bit of fresh air. And if you do that, that sells very well with decision makers at the end. And at first, it's very hard to sell them speed. Anyway, I work at the Nantes Urban Planning Agency, and for several years, we've been implementing programs to that effect, especially the intercommunal speed regulation plan called PMVI in the French acronym, and we've been implementing that for several years. I know that Frédéric Héron is going to talk about it, but I won't, because it's not peri-urban, but there's a bit of peri-urban in what can be discussed. It's yellow and red here. In yellow and orange, and in green you've got Nantes. Strong groupings of towns and cities. I told my colleague Jean-Michel that what they said was mostly about Lyon and Paris, because in the provinces we only have, we don't have 226 communes anymore. We have 23 groupings mostly. When I came back to the agency, I had to redo my whole geographical database. So 23 groupings, 8 master plans, and that lends weight. That lends a lot of weight. So communal groupings, well, you may have heard about the airport that's in the pipeline. Well, I mean, anyway. I like this chart. It's something that was drawn up for... It's an INSEE chart. I'm not going to talk about it. So that was a request made by the departmental council that asked our agency, ORAN, to design its mobility references. We had carte blanche about our diagnosis. Then the master plan may not have fully agreed with that, but we drew up a series of graphs showing that maybe the peri-urban areas were a new world. There are trains also in the peri-urban. I know that a lot of people are going to talk about stations. Now, INSEE said, based on the National Transport and Travel Survey of 2008, it's saying that the peri-urban is in yellow. There's more peri-urban areas than rural areas. And that's not including all the coastlines. That's quite extraordinary. And maybe it is a new world. And thinking about it, I think it's a new world. It's not America, but I'm thinking about Newfoundland here. It would be a sort of a new name for it. It's a new world. But anyway, I love this new world since I've been working about it, and I mean the urban core is too expensive, and so I'm really aggravated here because expensive prices forced me to leave Nantes, and since big cities do not know peri-urban dwellers, that helped me play my role to my client Petropol. So at what speed are we going to accelerate this better knowledge of peri-urbanites? Because when people leave Nantes, they don't go elsewhere. They go to Paris, and Parisians don't know the rest of France. They go to Rome or London. But we need to make a few education efforts for people who are mostly involved in metropolitan areas, because without peri-urban areas, they're nothing. And the Nantes metropolis drives the full department, but it's only effective functionally if everything is organized to give routing, deep routing to the peri-urban with stations and railroads and so on. So that's the INSEE map. So my question regarding speed won't be a question, the same question as motorists, but will we be fast enough? My obsession will be fast enough in avoiding replicating errors or correcting excesses in the peri-urban. It's like America. There are a lot of cars, 3 or 4 cars per household. Well, cars are great. So, of course, there will be excesses, as it was the case in the city. Will we be able to correct these excesses fast enough? Because they are beginning to get corrected in city centers. So we won't. We'll have hardly completed the job in urban centers that will have to do that in peri-urban centers. So what are the strategies, what are the resources, and at what speed are we going to move? This is a real speed war. Next chart, please. Please use the clicker. Please use the remote control. Okay, I'm the boss here. Great. So for the département, I won't go into the details, but we have 5 levers. Number 5, it's a matter of behavior, new technologies. It works well. We've already addressed it, so I won't talk about it. But it's not enough. Lever number 3, the gentleman from the Transport Authority didn't come. Well, that's too bad because, well, we move further, but then transport operators have to find ways to make it work. And that's hard to make it work because you'd have to invest vast amounts of money that we never had in the first place. So, number 1, territorial development. Can we do anything without territorial development, i.e. trying to address the increasing travel distances with creating more polarization? Having villages. I didn't like people replacing the word village with club. I mean, we need urban villages. It's great as a driving force. A France of villages is great. So how could we go forward if we don't have polarization, better balance between residential areas, working areas and services? So never forget about one. We'll never go anywhere. Without it, that will be like pissing in the wind, says the speaker. This master plan is very important, given the distances traveled. So, lever number 2. This is what I'm going to talk about, and I know Frédéric Héran will talk about it. We want to promote walking and cycling. So how do you improve the environment everywhere? Even in the desert you can do that. In peri-urban is just another way to have a city. So what's important is to have proximity, and local authorities love that. It works pretty well, they buy that. So that's for kids, that's for the elderly. I'm going to become elderly soon. I mean, Jean-Michel is working on crutches right now, so I mean, a lot of people are talking, not a lot of people are acting, but now we need to act. And there. That's what I would like to have. You may criticize it. I'm not going to take questions anyway, but it's between 15 to 27% market share. We've started from nothing, hardly any cycling, 2.5%. That's peanuts. That's a disgrace, really. Why aren't there more bikes in France? Where's the bike plan by the government? We've been waiting for it for 42 years. 13% walking. Well, of course, as you can see, the departmental roads are very hard to walk by with SUVs zooming past and so on. But anyway, that's insane. We want 10 to 15 25% even. So these are complex challenges, and I like this wording. We can't find an exit without simple strategies. So I have 5 minutes left. Okay. Oh my gosh. So we need to replace a territory-based logic with a flow-based logic. So the territory logic will impose its own rationale on people, kids, elderly, disabled people, and we need to replace it with a flow-based logic, which is really ubiquitous in France. And so the tool that I was talking about, it's a strategic tool. The speed regulation plan, a speed control plan, well, people don't like the word regulation, I mean, but it needs to be intercommunal because the communal scale is no longer the right one. You need to address groupings of municipalities. So I call it PMVI. We had a commission by a grouping of municipalities where there's going to be an airport built. It has 12 municipalities. And now the general method. Here you have 3 towns, removing everything that would let you recognize them to identify the main lanes and roads. In the territory that comes from the urban planning master plans, which are the expression of the projects of groupings and towns, is essential. So look at the yellow and orange spots here. So really to root that in the territory. Now you define new speed limits in urban areas, yellow areas. No debate here, truck drivers, motorists, and so on. These are all peaceful areas, 30 kilometers per hour. We've got everything we need for that in France. Is that 30 kilometers per hour everywhere? No. The main roads that are necessary to ensure smooth traffic for the economy, well, they go into these areas, and it's 50 kilometers per hour, but truly 50 kilometers per hour. But as soon as you've cleared the first stone house, because this is Brittany, then 30 kilometers per hour. The main roads that will slow down with a lot of speed regulation, that needs to be credible, a credible action here. Here now, in orange, now you add all the pedestrian and cycling plans, but you need to frame that, and it's hard to get the message across. I mean, it's only common sense. I don't understand why people don't get it, but maybe I'm wrong. In blue here, it's based on orange areas, dense urban areas, and here no debate either. It's 20 kilometers per hour. 30 is too much. And these are meeting areas. It's already provided for in legislation. It's all there in the legislation. And now this is what is being done at this grouping CCG. In orange, you've got the future airport. And so this is the map of main roads and the territory. That's 20% of the network, and we can do whatever we want on 70% of the road network. So I'll regulate my speed, and we can save time by going slower. Save time by going slower. This is what Talleyrand said. Slow down, coachman, I'm in a hurry. Slow down, coachman, I'm in a hurry. So, next slide here, you've got one town. So the framing is done at the grouping level, but here you can focus on a town. You've got the main roads. People tell me you can't touch that. Well, no. At the crossroads of the municipality here, I've got a meeting area. That's clever. I said, did I say that I wouldn't have any lorries inside? No, they simply have to follow the speed limits, which is 20 kilometers per hour. And, I mean, the elderly want to cross the road, so the lorry driver can wait a few minutes. So this means that in every city, we're doing that in all 20 towns, there's something between the town hall and the church. This is not done yet, but we have a project for all towns that is probably surprising, that will be innovative, and we want something like this right outside the church, and this is a retro innovative project. We're using the best from the past to design the best for the future. And this is what's most successful in my presentations. I mean, it sucks a bit because it's not the project at all, but this is a great meeting place. You've got two grandpas here and saying what happened in the fields, and the kids playing marbles, and the ladies having a chat as usual. So having public areas in peri-urban centers as in urban cores, we say that we need 12 main squares in one main square in each town. And so this was the village side. But in the countryside, what about it? We are being told that departmental roads are for cars only, that we're lagging behind, and the villages are few and far between, and people will never cycle. And no, with my project, I've got a 3-kilometer radius around each village, and you can cycle everywhere. And at a reasonable speed, because you're cycling. And so what does it look like? This is a departmental road. I love this picture. It's a national survey. It's a picture of the Route de Rennes. Rennes Road. It's beautiful if you eliminate the barriers here. It's nice. It's very straight. But still, there's a nice white line in the middle. You can't see pedestrians. Well, there are tracks here, probably that the people sink in the mud a bit when it's rainy. But anyway, we'll need to transform it. It's going to cheap and quick. We remove the barriers. So my chart here. So 70 kilometers per hour. Oh, then people start thinking it's no longer 90 kilometers per hour, it's 70, reduce cut speed by 10 to 20 kilometers per hour. You get the picture. And it can be done according to legislation. And so this is what it looks like, very roughly a down and dirty rendition. I like these areas where you can cycle or walk. And we've removed the barriers as well as the central line. We've got the best departmental network in France. In France, we've got the second best departmental network in France, and you can have this or this. On a territory like ours, there are lots of areas where people can't cycle, but, well, what about Denmark? I mean, they cycle for hours there. Well, this is things that we do at our agency to make people want to buy our project. So peaceful, smooth. This is the question that we have. How fast are we moving towards a development in our extraordinary built environment to build departmental avenues and no longer roads? Thank you. Thank you so much, Yann Le Gall.
Talking about mobility solutions, and we're talking about collective pathways to mobility. We had a survey that was commissioned by the Ministry of the Environment, and we looked at these emerging forms of mobility in urban peripheries. I like the word urban periphery as opposed to peri-urbia or peri-urban areas. So what are the alternative forms of mobility? What I mean is alternative solutions to individual cars. I mean, so instead of what are the other solutions? So instead of solo driving, you could have carpooling. You can, of course, have buses and collective and public transportation. So if you leave that aside, what are the other solutions? So the French word tram refers to, in a way, a first attempt at defining a solution, and that's what I was trying to do here. An outline. Outline for collective mobility. That's what that's the best translation for the word tram, tram de mobilité collective. An outline of possible or avenues for possible alternative solutions. So one thing that was mentioned is carpooling. You had forms of buses for pedestrians. The idea is that you have a sort of buses on demand. That is what we call pédibus. And then we have to, I mean, these are options and they're all, thought about. But of course, how does this translate? If you really want to implement this, this would bring about consequences in terms of policies and budgets, etc. So let's see how it would work first before we suggest it. And there were a number of studies conducted, and we were able to look at people who might be resorting to alternative forms of transportation. So who would be willing? Well, you would be looking at people who are flexible, adaptable, people who would resort to older forms of transportation when they encounter new situations. So, for instance, if gas becomes too expensive, they stop driving, they use the bicycle. So it's nothing really innovative, it's nothing new, it's just resorting to old solutions that are less expensive. But here, of course, this study was done for the purpose of the corporate world, that is, employees of a company who can take a collective a bus to work, as opposed to driving their individual cars. But then you have people who are willing to literally put their feet where their mouth is, that is, start to walk and do something, and people who cannot or will not do this. And so there was a survey done by Louis Morin in the Observatory of Inequalities, and he found that there's more poverty in urban centers than in the peripheries. In most of France, the average income in peripheric areas, in peri-urban areas, is higher than in city centers. However, in rural areas, you have much more challenges. The choice is between a car and a car. And that makes things much more difficult in the truly rural areas. And so you have the different types of profiles. You have people who have strong opinions, that are activists, that are willing to go out and take the bicycle and do this, and those that simply cannot or will not do this. So you have two profiles. So there are personal considerations. It's not just a matter of policies. You have now that's looking at people, looking at policies, and looking at models. Now you said that the peri-urban model is here to stay. That's what has been said. We will have suburbs, peri-urbia, peripheral areas. These will be here for some time. Maybe not forever. Maybe the present peri-urban model will change, but the change is already underway. Show that the existing model is stabilizing, paradoxically. Now, all sorts of experiments are conducted, and we find that public policy is totally unprepared for this change, especially changes in transportation, and they have no policies to support alternative solutions. So that's so when you look at alternative forms of transportation. Is there any knowledge, any objective knowledge? There are a few studies here and there, but say carpooling, very few people know about this. You have surveys conducted over the internet, questionnaires here and there, but it takes a lot of work. It would require a major ethnographic work to see who's doing carpooling, who the audiences are. In the winter, it's more difficult because people going home late at night want to go home. They don't want to bother with a questionnaire. So it's very difficult to gather data about carpooling and the possibilities. Then the knowledge of politicians is much more subjective. People try and get information intuitively. We have seen that a lot of that knowledge is a bit intuitive, a bit subjective. There's not much solid. But and yet, we find that politicians as well as institutions have become aware of this. They realize that for the climate plan, it is necessary to have alternatives to cars. For accessibility and what we call pedibus is a solution. That is, find a way, for instance, rather than having cars lining up in front of the schools, you can have school buses that like we have in certain countries. So that would be a solution. Now, of course, you have to see where it can work and what is the degree of elasticity. Are these peri-urban areas flexible? They're not much flexible in morphological sense. I mean, some roads simply are not suited for public transportation. You have the width of the road for a bus. You cannot have a school bus on a narrow road. I mean, there are things like that. And there are ways, for instance, near a train station, the pavement is such that you simply cannot park either cars or buses, and so it makes it very difficult to do anything. Then, of course, it's a matter of priorities. The policies have to choose between all sorts of things. There are other priorities, and people are concerned on one hand about both public transportation and people confined or isolated, and people who live in remote or quiet areas do not like to see a train line or a bus line coming nearby, because that means nuisance, noise pollution, etc. And so there is some resistance to public transportation, not always a positive response. And then some choices are made by policymakers, but of course a decision is made, but we do not know whether it is sustainable. You start something and you don't know what will happen of it 10 years down the road. Now, in terms of urban or territorial planning, land use planning, there has to be some sort of reform to be able to take these considerations into account. Now, we have seen that in regional planning, especially around specific poles or clusters, special arrangements must be considered. But as I said, there's the issue of flexibility. And the third aspect is budgets. How can you pay for all this? Especially if you want to have a new railway line, the regional train lines, you have corridors, railway corridors that are being built. That could be an alternative solution to the dissemination versus centralized building. Between this model, the traditional disseminated versus central, these lines can sort of bridge the gap between the two as opposed to keeping the divide. And then it is necessary, of course, to have some planning ahead of time. There's only so much you can plan. So for carpooling, for instance, there's often a gap between supply and use. It started off spontaneously, maybe it was encouraged by institutions, but we have areas that were earmarked for carpool parking, and it was not used. Or maybe it was not done properly. For instance, you have areas that enable bicycles to go to these areas, but then you have to go over a main road, and it's too dangerous, so people don't do it. I mean, there are things like that. And so it's all very well to promote carpooling, but all sorts of arrangements must be made to make it possible. And very often we find that the arrangements are not necessary and not effective. School buses, and there's been some work on that. You need to have the right balance. I mean, everybody involved in the system. You have associations, you have parents, school, children's parents, and it cannot be run by one group rather than another, because otherwise it won't work. For instance, if the school is all too present, then the school bus is seen as a service, and so paid for by the parents. And so if the school is too present, then people decide, well, you know, it's paid for by the state, whereas in fact it's paid for by the parents or associations. And so everybody's got to have a say in the running of these things. Otherwise, the attitude will not work. So school buses or carpooling have to be based on the infrastructure, but also existing solidarities and attitudes. In other words, you can't simply rely on the technological, on the technical setup. You need to have existing arrangements, solidarities, plus you have to introduce new ways and means. It won't work all by itself. Also, it has to be, and the doors have got to be open. You can't just say, right, it's only for mobility issues. You have people who live in small towns, and they want to say, right, well, we need to have mobility for school children, but you have another type of mobility for other users. You can't have this. The doors have got to be open. Likewise, it's not just a matter of transportation. These school buses, these pity buses, can be used for other purposes, for other users. It is for the villages to decide, or for the towns to decide what use to be made. And so it's not just for specific, say, bus routes. It can also be to promote community life. And so that sort of departitioning is necessary. And let me get back to something about, well, what was said yesterday. Some of the challenges today, we have these, new forms of collective mobility. We find that there's some form of collective transportation. You have some territories that are well endowed, that have set up systems, but others who have simply been left out altogether, and areas that are not really rural, but they're neither here nor there, and they can have dual peripheries. They will have a suburban model, and here I disagree with Jacques Lévy. The word suburban that was mentioned yesterday by Martin Schuller does not really exist in France. Suburbia does not exist in France. We talk about these urban corridors. These are just emerging in France, and they are built around some form of public transportation system. So when there is this sort of mobility available, then these clusters, these urban clusters, or corridors can form. But then outside these corridors, you have places that are left out. And of course, we have to look at this, because it becomes a dual situation: those that are in and those that are out. And those that are out really present something of a challenge. And it's not just within the well-served peripheries which have public transportation. It's outside these corridors that the real issue lies. Thank you.
Pour lancer la discussion, comment dire, moi, dans ce que vous avez dit.
Now, you both said something interesting, and I would like to say this. There's something in common in the two papers, in your two presentations. Local officials are put to task. I mean, voters and the population at large have expectations of their local officials, of local authorities. But you believe that local or even central authorities are not doing enough. I mean, you say that they were unprepared, they have no plan, but are they in fact an impediment? Do they block creativity, inventiveness, or solidarity? I mean, this was said. I mean, the inhabitants are trying to find their own solutions because there's nothing happening in an organized public way that is promoted by local or authorities. But that's France. But how does it happen outside France? I mean, you talk about these. Some of the impediments you have described are linked to the French mobility culture. But is this something you may have found in other countries as well? Or is it something specifically French about the way things are done? Yann Le Gall, what do you have to say? Yann Le Gall from Brittany. Well, of course, local authorities, especially when you have several towns working together, it's not as though these local administrations were not considering this, but they cannot find solutions. You have people living in these clusters of towns that all go to work to the city center or to the urban centers, and they are simply overwhelmed because the flows are such that they simply can't handle this, and the numbers are growing, so they are simply overtaken by events. I mean, the numbers are such that they simply cannot come up with a solution, but they're willing to try things if people could give them good ideas. So carpooling, okay, but that's all very well. If you want a carpool to go to work, that's one thing, or to go to the city or to the train station. But that's one small aspect. People need to get to the market. They need to go to various places for other reasons, and so it's a general problem, and this problem is very French. Well, the problem is that there's a lobby. It's not the pedestrians' lobby. It's the car industry's lobby. I mean, there's no strategy. I mean, we want to keep jobs in the car industry, for car manufacturers, for engineers, etc. I mean, I worked in the ministry, in the labor ministry for years, and then I couldn't take it anymore, and so I left, and I worked for independent as an independent consultant, and I'd rather be to say what I think. And do what I like, rather than toe the ministry line. But what I've been saying again and again, instead of having this, considering the territory is what's underneath our feet. I mean, we have to, instead of saying, we have the car will be the solution to all, we have to say, look, the territory is for people who live there, pedestrians who walk on the territory. So we have to substitute the pedestrians' land for we have to substitute the dominion of the car for this concept of giving the heritage back to the people. And there are many, many ways that can make it possible for not just pedestrians or cyclists or the citizen at large. And of course, saying this sort of thing has drawn me enemies, but this is something in France, but strangely enough, in French-speaking countries, in Algeria, Morocco, it's the same attitude. It's a very vertical relationship. I mean, Marc Dumont. Well, I'll give you an example. Well, those know that. My big thing is roundabouts. I love these, as opposed to but unless you stay from the start that you have the big roundabouts and the small ones. I mean, I like the small ones, but I don't like the big ones. And urban planners mix everything up. But I mean, engineers tend to confuse things. And yet I like engineers. I have many friends amongst engineers, but you have to be careful. You have roundabouts on roads at a human scale, and those that are meant only for big cars with no room for pedestrians or cyclists. And so that scale simply is out of the picture. I've written books about this, and well, I was not asked to speak about this, but all my knowledge has been taken from an Englishman. You have, well, in England they drive to the left as opposed to the right, and nobody will listen to me in France, but in England it's common knowledge, and so I'm a small agency. I have 10 people working with me. But if we were any bigger, we would draw all sorts of criticism. All right, there are different scales, and you're right, and you shouldn't sort of separate out. You have politicians on the one hand, or local authorities, the administration on the one hand, and then those who actually work, the engineers, etc. The actors are more complex than that, and local authorities have all sorts of challenges that they have to somehow juggle, and they don't have all the solutions, and of course they're very often overtaken by events. That's one thing. Now, something else was said. France, well, is the inventor of urban sprawling. I mean, we wanted that the whole territory should be accessible to all, and that led to urban sprawling. But now we are paying the consequences. And the difference with Switzerland there is you have a decoupling between urbanization and mobility, and this decoupling does not exist in Switzerland. In Switzerland, shopping centers you can walk to from public transportation, and in France this happens after the fact. I mean, first you have completely inaccessible shopping areas, and then if the road is not good enough, maybe you build a transportation link, but it's not planned that way. It's true for airports as well. Any case, you had other examples mentioned this morning. Some people find it amusing, but I like Stéphane de Goutin's movie, and it's not a joke. It happens in real life. A photographer in the United States took pictures of areas where land that was built with the detached houses was left fallow, was left for waste. And you might wonder what will happen in 30 years' time. I mean, well, maybe in 30 years' time we'll have the same thing as you can find in North America. I mean, this built land that becomes wastelands or ghost peri-urban towns. Now, our friend from Denmark, thank God you're here, because you can give us tell us about the Danish model, which is, of course, much better. Jan Le Gall, you know, I've lived in Denmark for many years, and there's the bicycle principle there. All small towns in Denmark, I mean, most people who live in Denmark cycle to work. I mean, most Danes would never dare cycle in Paris. Everybody lives everywhere, but everybody works in Copenhagen. But all small towns in Denmark are connected by cycle paths, not of the type you're suggesting. The Danes wouldn't. They would have a white line in the middle, just like a road, so you drive or you ride your bicycle on the right, and where you have to school, you have a network of bicycle paths. Children cycle to school, and since they've known this ever since they were children, once they get a car, they also know what it is to be a bicycle rider, so they're much more cautious with cyclists when they become car drivers. And then when a school closes, unless there's if there isn't a cycle path next to the new school, well, they have to simply encroach upon the road and cut out a cycle path on the road. Otherwise, people won't go to that new school. And now, in every village, you have a minister who will usually organize weddings and festivals, etc. But you can bring your own food, etc. And there's a tradition there to hold these festivities in the local school. And if a school no longer serves as a school, the school remains as a social center where people come to socialize. And so there may be an economic, social, cultural development that mean that schools may be relocated, but the foundation of village life remains in the local school. So that's why you need to also have these cycle paths leading to the schools. Now, there could be all sorts of criticism, and when I go to the Drôme area and I see these cycle paths, I mean, you have all over the Drôme department, you have all sorts of cycle paths, but these cycle paths look rather hazardous compared to the ones we have in Denmark. Well, if you go to Boulevard Magenta right here in Paris, the cycle paths are two ways with a dividing line in the middle. But any case, there should be a connection between the way in which traditional culture can be recycled. I'm not saying that we have to hark back to the church, because of course the church, medieval church, doesn't apply to what you have today. But there can be some form of association, not, well, to replace the church. You can have some community life. But if you haven't been to Denmark, you should see that, because there you can see how life can be organized when people have the right attitude, and a bicycle is part and parcel of that. My name is Catherine de Vinci from the École Polytechnique in Montreal. I'm an engineer, and I'm from Montreal. Yann Le Gall is running away. Now, I would like to make a comment about what was said about the way in which you can compare with other non-European regions. So Montreal is outside Europe, and we are halfway between what you get in the United States and what goes on in Europe. A lot of the developments in peri-urban areas is rather spontaneous, and of course, we may very well wish for people to walk or to cycle, and about 10% of distances can be done on foot, so something like 18% can be cycled to. But of course, you need to have a place to go to. The distances are longer, and what happens now is that you have urban dwellers who go shop in these power centers, and so they mimic the behavior of peri-urbanites, peri-urban dwellers. But that's shopping. But what about school? It doesn't seem to be a real issue. But in Quebec, now these schools are remote, especially for people living in peri-urban areas, and so you have to improvise and you have to find solutions, and we are way behind. Urban developers or property developers build all sorts of things, but then there's no transportation solution to make it possible for people to go from A to B without their cars. I mean, that's still something not happening. Well, thank you so much for these explanations. And now, this session is coming to an end. May I not answer? Well, look, in 1 minute, hang on. I wasn't talking about bicycles and cars. The reason I was talking, I said we need to have a technical cultural revolution, and here I'm talking to elected officials. They are my clients as a consultant. I mean, of course, we can talk about Denmark. You have 45%. You want to get 55% of cyclists. We have 2%, so we have a huge gap to bridge. But for this to happen, you need a strategy. What I'm saying is this business about speed limits between towns, this is a strategic document intended for local officials, for local authorities. It would take a couple of hours to set it up. But when you have mayors still acting in good faith, local officials, local authorities who find themselves unable to grapple with this technical monster in France, we will never go anywhere. We'll never get anywhere. That's what I'm trying to say. We need to have a mind revolution. If you want to have the peaceful town, a peaceful town, or we want to be able to lower speed limits. Very often you can ask a landscape architect to redesign the landscape, asking them for small roads with roundabouts, and he turns this into a dining room. I mean, it is so overbuilt that you can't use it. So there are mistakes. I do criticize engineers, but I do love them. But I mean, I may criticize them, but I still like them. I mean, when we listen to the things in Copenhagen and Denmark, this is sickening. This is depressing. I mean, we went from 2.5% to 4.5%. People say, well, that's amazing. I mean, we consider this a huge success. And we need to have double digits at least before we can start talking about public space. And when we talk about public space, technocrats have their own little ideas, but the public space should be for the public. I mean, that's what I'm saying. And for me, it's a big question, but academics may not be interested. It's been like this for the past 40 years.
Den Rechten.